Hey, Mallory Dunn here, owner and designer of Smart Glamour. So lately there's been a lot of conversation around size inconsistency and especially how that ties to body positivity. And I believe that a lot of these conversations are really not focusing on the correct issue. They're spreading a lot of misinformation about size, about how clothes are made, about what sizes mean, and about how we should feel about them. And I wanted to address all of that to you guys, and also give you some fashion industry information about sizing and size charts and how all these things were created and why. Stick with me because it's a lot of information, but it's really, really important. But please also stick around to the end of the video where I am going to talk about how all of these things do tie back into body positivity and how you feel about yourself. So the first thing that I want to talk about is a statistic, which is that 97% of the clothing that we wear and consume and buy in America is made overseas. Compare that with just back in the 1960s, which in the scheme of the world is really not that long ago, 80 to 90% of our clothing was made here in the States. And the reason why it's important that clothes are made here where we are consuming them is a really important word: accountability. Accountability means that we can oversee where our clothes are being made, how they're being made, we can oversee the lives of the people that are making them, and we can ensure that fair labor practices are being followed. A sad fact that we all know, but we all kind of try to push to the back of our mind, is that clothes that are made overseas, for the most part, are very often made in sweatshops. So not all sweatshops are equal, not all sweatshops are as terrible as other ones. A lot of sweatshops are so awful that they won't even let reporters and writers and bloggers and news reporters into them. So whenever you read about a sweatshop or you especially see video of one, think of the fact that there are tons of sweatshops that are even worse than that one because they just actually will not let reporters in. If you want to read more about the dangers of sweatshops and learn more about it, please watch a documentary called The True Cost. I'm going to put a link to it in the description for this video. And also I'll put some extra links to just great articles and news stories that have been written up on sweatshops. So how does this tie all back into sizing and size inconsistency? So being a part of the fashion industry, I see tons and tons and tons of complaints about sizing and about clothes and about how they fit and what brand is true to size and what one isn't. And the majority of brands that are getting the most complaints are brands that are made in sweatshops. So think about a giant store where there's tons and tons of clothes. There's huge ones that are giant corporations. There's smaller ones that are, specific clothes only stores. Those stores, for the most part, are not even designing their own clothes. The designers that work on those clothes and design those clothes and sketch those clothes and get them made work at separate design houses. They don't work for those companies. Those companies then buy from these design houses. And I know about these design houses because I used to work for one. So design houses like the one that I worked in, they have their own line of clothing, which they usually call their line, and then they have separate lines of clothing that are called private label. Private label lines are sold directly to different stores, like I mentioned before. And these deals, these buys, are even more high stakes most of the time because they're huge sales. So these buyers are not just buying from one design house. They're buying for their stores from tons of little design houses. And all of the design houses are separate entities. So every design house has a different group of designers, and the designer that is in charge of fit and sizing and making sizes and all of those things, directions on how to make the clothes, is called a technical designer. And each company and even each kind of clothing within a company has their own fit. And then each of those sections, the designer comes up with who their customer is. So once they decide what their fit's going to be, they go and they find a fit model who embodies that body type, whatever that is. And then they fit the clothes to that person. And she's just one size. She's usually about a medium in whatever their size chart is. And everything is fit to her. Then the pattern that's used to make the clothes is graded, which is another term, which basically means that the pattern is graded up and down into the other sizes. So look at a store, say, like Wet Seal. Wet Seal's clothes are not all designed in the same place. They're designed in tons of houses that then get all bought in and brought in together. And that's why you can walk into a store and pick up a medium in a certain top and have it fit you a certain way, and then pick up a medium in another top that's sitting right next to it, and it totally doesn't fit you. It's because they're made in different places. So then, on top of these things being made and designed in different places, they're then not manufactured here, as I mentioned earlier with the sweatshops. All of these instructions and patterns that the technical designer comes up with is then sent overseas. And the only communication that most design houses have with those factories are not with the factories themselves. They're with an agent who works as a go-between. So there's a whole nother layer of where accountability gets pushed back even further. Once, if you're lucky, maybe twice a year, designers do go overseas and try to visit some of the with some of the agents that they work with, and maybe they'll see a factory, maybe, but that's it. They're not going in and seeing where clothes are made and standing over the seamstress and like checking the seams. That's not happening. And they don't care to make that happen because the clothes are sold for $4. You can go buy a yard of fabric for $5, and that's on the cheap end. And yet you can go buy a top somewhere for $5. Think about that. So all of the different components of a garment do have to be approved, whether that's everything from the color to the fabric, meaning the weight of the fabric, how thick it is, the type of stretch it has, and then also even separate components of the garment. So say it has a strap, say it has a little plastic hook, a button, any of those things have to be sent over. And then once all of those things are approved, they make a sample, the sample has to be sent over, be approved as well, and that's when they check the fit on the fit model. But if you ask anyone who works in design production, ask them how many times these things that have to get approved come over correct the first time, and the answer will be never. So when they send things over and they're wrong, the design house has to make comments like, you know, this quality isn't good enough, this isn't stretchy enough, this is too light, this is too heavy. You send those comments and you mail it back. There's only so many times you can do that process before you run out of time. So usually by about the third time, you either have to accept it or you have to abandon it. And hopefully they've fixed it, but sometimes they haven't. And if we, rewind to that idea of $1 million order worth of tank tops, then everyone is scrambling around the office. We've got this tank top where we know the quality isn't right or the fit isn't right. What do? Do we lose $1 million order, or do we keep a tank top that isn't correct? What do you think happens? They keep the tank top that's not correct. So this is all because of fast fashion, mass manufacturing, and high consumption that goes on in the United States. If you look back in time, up all the way through the 1920s, people were still, especially women, were still getting a lot of their clothes custom made by the person down the street. And then we developed this idea of using factories to make our clothing, which at first sounded like a really great idea. And then that turned into globalization, and let's have our factories be elsewhere, and it should be a win-win. It should be we get things for cheaper and people in less off countries get jobs and get to make money and hopefully get to work out of poverty. But we all know that that's not how it happened. And when they first started doing this, they didn't make a size chart. People would make their own sizes, and obviously because of that, the fit was awful. You'd buy something from one place and then buy something from a different place, and there was no way to figure out what size you were. So the USDA actually came up with size chart standards that each size needs to kind of fall into. Every true company that is making clothes for you, if you go to their website, you can find their size chart, and their clothes should fit those measurements. But the thing about size charts is that they only show your bust, your waist, and your hip. And we are made up of tons more measurements than that. We're also our height. We're also our bust size. We're also our torso length. We're also our muscle mass. We are tons and tons of other measurements. And as I've actually demonstrated before with Smart Glamour, two people can have the exact same measurements and look completely different. Most people are not a set size. A lot of people are between sizes. A lot of people are a different size on top than they are on the bottom. The only way to know that is to learn your body, know your measurements, and check size charts. Another factor going into size is the garment or the piece of clothing itself. So look at these shorts, you've probably seen them. They don't look like the exact same style of shorts. The shorts in the back look like they have a longer rise than the shorts in the front. So the rise is from your crotch all the way up to where the pants stop. If something is high-waisted, it's going to sit higher up on your body, where most people in general on a size chart are smaller. If something is lower rise, mid-rise, extra low rise, it's going to be sitting at a wider part of your body. So if you put a high-rise short and a low-rise short in the same size next to each other, the waists are not going to be the same, because the waist is not actually sitting in the same part of somebody's body. So it is possible that the high hip of a size 4 can be similar to the natural waist of a size 10. The fit of a garment also relies on the silhouette and the stretch of the fabric. The only way to find clothes that are super fitted, super tailored, that fit you perfectly, unless you are hourglass sample size, is to get them altered or get them custom made. It doesn't mean that the clothes are not true to size. It just means that we are not robots. We are not carbon copies of one another. Sizes and size charts are a mold, and bodies will not always fit that mold. That's fine. So if you really, really look back into all the things that I've mentioned, from starting with how clothes are made, where they're made, the design houses that they're made at, the fit of each design house, the customer that they have in mind, the fit model that they use, then where their clothes are sent to be produced, the quality of the labor, where it's being produced, the fact that it's being produced in a country where there's no accountability, how much you're paying for the garment, how much they care about getting things right or just accepting whatever comes back because they don't want to lose the money on the sale. All of these things are what create size and consistency. It's not just because people aren't following size charts, or size charts are different from brand to brand, which, by the way, they're always going to be different from brand to brand. There's millions of people that make clothes. They have a general sense of a standard for sizes. As I mentioned before, the USDA came up with one, but they're different companies. They're going to be slightly different. And I dare you, please go look at a couple different size charts and compare them. They're really close. I've done this multiple times as somebody who has my own size chart. I want to make sure that my size chart is similar to other brands. So I want my charts to be similar to straight size charts and to plus size charts, which that's a whole nother thing. People that make clothes don't all offer the same size clothes. It's up to them, it's up to their company what sizes they offer. Somebody can offer extra small to medium and call it a day. Plus size brands start anywhere from a 10 to a 14 and go all the way to a 20 or a 24 or a 32 or a 36. Smart Glamour obviously makes extra small through 6X. It's never gonna be that somebody's size chart is exactly the same as someone else's. But the most important thing that I want everyone to take away from this is that all of this information and all of this inconsistency just further proves that your size doesn't mean anything. Sizes only refer to the amount of thread and fabric that go into making your clothes. They do not and they cannot measure your worth, your beauty, your intelligence, your kindness, anything else. So if you have to wear a size 4 in one brand and you wear a size 8 in another brand, the 4 should not make you feel better about yourself and the 8 should not make you feel worse. The problem is that for a lot of people, it does. And what we really should be looking at is why that is. Why do we think the bigger the number, the worse we are? Why do we think that a large is an unacceptable word, but a small is a positive word? Why do we think that if you put an extra in front of that large, it's even worse? It's the stigma attached to wearing these sizes, to being bigger, that is the real problem. That is what all of these campaigns should be about. Pointing out the fact that someone's girlfriend wears an extra large in all of her clothing and there's no reason she should be an extra large is not body positive, because you are attaching a negative stigma to the word extra large. And I mean, he's not the person that came up with it. It's the stigma that society has attached to being an extra large. But going on a rant about how wrong it is that his girlfriend could wear an extra large is not helpful. What's helpful is dismantling the system that tells you that wearing an extra large is a problem. We cannot change the sizing system. It's not going to change. And we cannot change size charts. We cannot expect every designer on this earth to have the same one. We cannot buy clothes that are not made sustainably and expect them to be consistent. The more that you learn about your body and your measurements, the easier this is, the less scary this is, and more importantly, the more empowering it is. Own your body, not your size. Blame society's stigma, not your size. Fight back. If you want consistency with your clothing, shop small. You need to know where your clothes are made. With accountability comes reliability.